a message that I get that. It's going to pop up and say, are you okay with being recorded? And just going to do a couple housekeeping, mention a couple housekeeping items here. We're going to ask folks to stay on mute. We will have a chance for actual conversation questions. That's why we did it as a meeting. We want to be able to offer a roundtable discussion opportunity. And as we go through our presentations, we're going to ask that you use the chat function to kind of post questions as they come up so you don't forget them. And as Sarah and I transition between speakers, we might field a couple questions kind of in between just to break it up a little bit, and then we'll come back for questions and discussion at the end. You'll see a couple links pop up in the chat as we go throughout. Annie, Jim, and Paul Erkowicz will be sharing those into the chat. And there's our other participant. The other thing is, once I go into a screen share mode, I think I end up coming out as, instead of, I don't know if you guys are in gallery view or speaker view, but if you do you know how to change views as you go through a Zoom meeting? I see heads nodding, that's good. After 2 years of doing Zoom, I think we're all pretty savvy with it. But when I go into the sharing slide mode, if it gives you an option, I encourage you to kind of either minimize me as a talking head or kind of drag me to the bottom right-hand corner. That's going to be where you're going to be hiding the least amount of information on the slide if you drag me down to the right lower corner. And with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen. We're going to have a couple of poll questions here to introduce. Yep, Susan, I got that. I sent her a message in chat. I'm not quite sure. I'm hoping Elsa can hear us, and that it's just an audio on her end. Continuing to have issues, let me know, so we can figure out what's going on there. And okay, so welcome to our World Water Day, World Ag Day, or National Ag Day, not World Ag Day. Oh, let me go to the beginning slide. Start at the beginning. There we go. So you're here, you made it. We're glad you're joining us. Tonight we're going to be talking about water quality and best practices. We're going to talk about local water quality conditions and kind of the role of agricultural in stewarding the land and helping ensure high water quality within our region. And we're going to get to the ag BMPs kind of later in the session tonight. In the discussion, I really want to kind of focus on what's the science. We're a science-based organization, so what's the science telling us in terms of what the water quality conditions are and what recommendations are kind of out there for our watershed, and then how PRWC and NRCS can team up and work with our local ag operators to improve, enhance on the stewardship that they're already doing. And before we go too far along, I just want to mention that the event tonight is part of our Pomperaug Watershed-Based Plan Implementation Groundwork Project, which is funded by the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection through a United States Environmental Protection Agency Clean Water Act Section 319 non-point source grant. It's a mouthful, but it's an important nuance and funding stream for making such watershed enhancements. So this is who's here as your speakers tonight. This is me, Carol Haskins, the Executive Director at PRWC. Sarah Ammirato, Sarah, correct me.
Ammirato.
Ammirato, okay, I got it right. Who's a soil conservationist with Natural Resource Conservation Service. And notice that DEP logo is on here as well. DEEP logo as a funding partner for the program tonight. So just a quick overview of who PRWC is. Our mission is to advocate for excellent water quality in the Pomperaug watershed communities through the use of science and education, and we share our knowledge and expertise with others committed to the protection of local water resources, and water resources, not just local, for future generations. So we're working with folks throughout the state and the region and nationally. Sarah, do you want to give a quick plug for who NRCS is?
Yes, so NRCS is a branch of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I put our motto on here, helping people help the land. So our mission is to help farmers implement best management practices that will both enhance their farm operations and help them become better stewards of the land and preserve our natural resources. All of the work that NRCS does is voluntary, so our agricultural producers and landowners come to us when they're ready to make changes or need help with an issue that they're seeing on their farm. And I'm going to get into more of the best management practices that we help design and implement a little bit later in the presentation.
Thanks, Sarah. And that, just kind of highlighting what you guys do is voluntary. The things that PRWC is doing is also voluntary. We're not a regulatory agency. That's not our function. So we can be a creative partner for helping implement stewardship practices throughout our watershed. So let's hear a little bit about who's here. I think we know most of the folks that are here. I know most of the folks that are here, but let's start with, where are you from? If you are an ag operator or just a resident, let us know which municipalities your operations are located, and or if you're outside of the watershed.
I'm not sure. The only option was Bethlehem.
Really?
The poll came up and then it went away. Maybe I did something.
You must have done something. Okay. Well,
Here we go. Never mind. I didn't.
Okay, there you are. You're on
There
your
we go.
phone, so I don't know how that works.
Yeah, it's different. I'm not sure where my computer is. I'd have to ask Sarah.
Or Maggie.
Well, she's got her own, but still.
Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna hit end poll. There's only one person that hasn't participated, and that might be me. So I'm gonna end that and then just let you guys see where everybody's from. Most of y'all are from outside the watershed tonight, so I kind of expect that because we know who's here. So I'm gonna hit stop share, and I'm gonna go to our next question with a, let's see. We're going to ask you about how much acreage of land do you steward? So if you're a land trust, you can put in as acreage for under your stewardship. We got a couple land trust partners here. And I think I forgot to add a NA option. But just a couple more folks maybe to participate, maybe not. I think that might probably be everybody. And that one. And we've got some good chunks of land here tonight, more than 500 acres, 50 to 100 acres. And then we got a couple micro farms, so that's fun. All right, tell us about what type of agricultural operation describes you. And you can select multiple. couple more seconds and let folks populate. Yeah, kind of knowing who's here listening. Don't have a whole lot of producers, but that's okay. Got lots of ambassadors here tonight who know farmers and the big landowners. So I'm going to end on that one. So fair amount of crop production, both corn, hay, and vegetable, as well as forest products and landscaping stock. And then the last question for now is, actually, I don't even need to do that one because no one had livestock. So I'm not going to ask about livestock, which is like how many head of livestock do you have? So we'll skip that one. So I'm going to jump into, Pomperaug Watershed. We're looking to see, where folks are from with a, just gauging, are you in the watershed? Are you outside the watershed? And kind of where the interest might lie. But the Pomperaug Watershed we're about 90 square miles, covering Bethlehem, Woodbury, a little more than half of Southbury, and some outlying corners into Washington, Roxbury, Watertown, Morris, tiny little corner in Middlebury. And we're also, not PRWC, but our watershed is exporting water to Watertown, Middlebury, and Oxford for drinking water purposes. And the underground water supplies are just as important as the rivers and streams within our community. And we're a very studied watershed with mirroring geology for the Connecticut River Valley. So, PRWC, we're science-based. It's kind of our jam. So I think most folks here know what a watershed is. It's section of land that drains water to a common point, and it's the surface water as well as the groundwater. And really the important piece of why watersheds is that we all have a role in helping maintain high quality streams and to restore those with impairments. So things coming off the land, it could be farming, it could be urban, it could be suburban, things like bacteria, pesticides, road salt, petrochemicals, heated runoff, all of these things can make their way into our waterways and cause big problems. So we're not trying to single out the agricultural community tonight. It takes a village is kind of our common message tonight. And I think we all understand and know what the importance of clean water is, or why clean water is so important. Supporting recreation, drinking water, cooking, other recreation, scenic beauty, sanitation, habitat, in-stream habitat, aquatic life, as well as production. We needed to grow plants, including our food, and watering our animals. So that importance of clean water, I think, just kind of resonates even louder for agricultural producers. And it really comes down to, we want to give our animals clean water. We need ample water supplies to grow crops and to grow nursery stock, and water is obviously a major driver when it comes to the timing of when it's there and how that impacts our agricultural operations. So I don't think we need to tell you why it's important. I think you know why it's important. So what's going on here in the Pomperaug watershed is we have generally pretty high quality rivers and streams. We have class A, class AA. AA rivers and streams could be potentially a drinking water source. And class B rivers are ones that they can't be a drinking water source, but they generally support a healthy aquatic life population as well as recreational uses. And you can learn more about the water quality classifications in Connecticut from Connecticut Deep, or checking out this great online interactive map from CT Eco. So while we have class A, AA, and B rivers, we do have a couple areas of impairments, and this is a summary of kind of what's going on statewide. That Pomperaug watershed is think most folks know is Western Connecticut, part of the Housatonic system. Again, Woodbury, Bethlehem, Southbury. So we have a couple areas that don't support aquatic life. There's some kind of barrier, whether it's flow regime or it could be an impoundment, for example, like a dam that just restricts aquatic life movement. And then we have recreational impairments, which are associated with higher bacteria levels. And I think what you'll notice in this map on the right is we're not alone. It's creeping up on about 300. It's like 280, I believe is the number. Sorry, mouse is touchy. That have some sort of recreational use impairment. And you can also see from that, there's about 6,000 miles of rivers and streams in Connecticut, and not all of them have been assessed. So, so we're not alone, but we're also still assessing these waters for these purposes. For the Pomperaug watershed, okay, now that's not going to be touchy. Those impairments include the Weekapimi River up in Bethlehem into Woodbury, as well as a couple sections of the Pomperaug in Southbury, and a segment of Transylvania Brook. And the Weekapimi showed up on the impaired waters list around 2012. I think it was 2012. And that's what kind of drove us to develop a watershed-based plan. We're like, okay, this is some sort of, there's something happening in our watershed, and we need to start taking a little closer look to see what's going on, and start making plans to make sure other rivers and streams don't deteriorate, and also try to bring these back into supporting aquatic life or recreational purposes, recreational activities. So our plan had a number of objectives, which were to update baseline conditions in the watershed, identify existing water quality issues and pollutant sources, identify water quality monitoring needs, to engage our communities as well as people who live and work in the watershed in the stewardship, and prioritizing projects that can help improve and protect water quality. And ultimately, the goal is to implement stewardship and best practices that will help restore our waters and delist them from this impaired waters list. So one thing I just want to mention is that this watershed plan was developed on fairly limited data sets. For the Weekapimi, we had one data point in Woodbury, kind of at the bottom of the river, and there was only one season of data. So we'll talk about, some of the recommendations and the ongoing monitoring that we've been doing to better understand this particular impairment and the others throughout the watershed. So, okay, something's not working right. So to do that, to understand kind of the nature of what's going on in the watershed, we did a series of GIS analysis and some desktop modeling. We looked at things like land use, rainfall, annual rainfall, the soils, runoff, what's the density of septic systems, is there sewer service, is there livestock presence, what's going on in the background. So, oops. Yeah, looking at all of that from attributes of the land use, what's going on right in the riparian zone, what's the land cover, what's forested, what's impervious, what's developed, what are the underlying soils, to understand how much runoff is going to come off the landscape, looking at what's protected, looking at, again, what's impervious, what point source discharges exist. So that's like a direct wastewater discharge, for example, and looking at the different concentrations of bacteria that may come from those sources, but also looking at phosphorus and nitrogen. They all kind of go hand in hand in terms of things that get washed off the landscape and into our rivers and streams that eventually end up in Long Island Sound. So they all have kind of different implications from a water quality perspective. So really the important piece that comes out of all of that mapping and understanding the coefficients is what are the modeled relative sources of bacteria that we expect coming off of the landscape in the different subwatersheds within the larger Pomperaug watershed. And not surprisingly, from our standpoint, is, Southbury is more developed. The center of Woodbury, kind of downstream, is a little more developed. So the urban landscape is going to be a bigger relative source of bacteria. Septic systems are kind of a separate little carve out of that. And then, it's things like pet waste and largely pet waste and or septic failure. There could be an illicit discharge somewhere in the watershed. We factored for something like that. An illicit discharge would be someone might have a washing machine or a outflow pipe from their house connected to a stormwater conveyance system, for example, so like a catch basin. But there's not as much rural land in Southbury. There's still a fair amount, and there's still some livestock in the lower watershed. But there's this forested chunk. There's still a fair amount of forested, so there is some background, kind of precedent expected from our wildlife population. And then when you compare that to what's going on in the Wikipini watershed, you get, some of Woodbury is reflected in the urban landscape. There's more forested landscape and more kind of rural, not as urban, less suburban. That landscape is going to have a potentially higher bacteria load and more livestock presence, less likely to have an illicit discharge, just because I don't remember why we made that assumption. I think it's that there's less businesses and just overall less dense, and I think less of a storm sewer conveyance system was a piece of that. The Nonawag, which didn't fall into the impaired waters list, is similar to the Wikipini, but there's even more livestock presence on that watershed and a little bit more, similar forest cover, actually a little bit less forest cover, but and then we do have some urban, again, with the center of Woodbury. But again, we're looking at the relative sources of where things are coming from. So we know there's a fair amount of background just happening from wildlife. And, the rural landscape has some influence in our upper watershed areas. And then in our lower watershed areas, there's more of an urban impact in terms of those bacteria levels. And then Transylvania Brook is kind of a weird assortment of balancing all of those different sources. So just kind of a bit of an anomaly in terms of what's going on over there. So in preparing the watershed-based plan, so we did the desktop analysis, and then we did some ground truthing. We did a series of windshield surveys, visual assessment surveys, so actually walking the stream channel in a few spots, taking a broad look at what the in-stream conditions are from a habitat and stream bank stability, but also looking at where more specific potential sources of bacteria may be coming from, or where there's opportunities for things that could help filter that bacteria load. And we'll talk about those. So in addition to walking the stream channels, we had about 60 sites of kind of potential concern, potential sources of bacteria, whether they're urban or agricultural or areas, old neighborhoods that were old camps that may be converted to year-round residences, that septic systems may not be upgraded, looking at areas where there may be a point source discharge, looking at areas where there's chronic waterfowl or pet waste concerns. And so we took a look at all of those. Like I said, windshield survey, drive around, things you can see from the road, or things you can see from a GIS aerial image, gives us a good look at things. And that allowed us to come up with some management recommendations. The biggest one, our land use committee and science committee were heavily involved in developing the plan. And we were all very concerned that the impairments are listed on a very limited data set. 1 year of data, one data point. So what does that really tell us? And so we've done a lot to improve our monitoring and assessments, do some more thorough monitoring and assessments. We recognize that it really does take a village. So education and outreach across the board. Ag happens to be a target audience. I don't want to say target audience, but a section of the community that we've not had a lot of engagement with, and we're looking to build that relationship. So, we know our farmers are stewards of the land, and we haven't had a lot of interaction. So we're hoping to get to know you a little better and find opportunities to work together. And then we have on the ground actual structural BMPs, best management practices to implement in our urban areas and suburban areas, as well as ones that are appropriate for agricultural areas. And just kind of a quick at a glance, some things that could be appropriate for urban and suburban areas. Some could be rural too, like a rain garden is or a rain barrel, and rain gardens are great in any landscape. But they, in urban areas, it's especially important to reduce the volume of runoff coming off of the landscape. And help filter it, keep it in the ground. It'll help not just from the water quality, but also the water quantity and timing of our storm surges. And then as part of this plan, we looked at, those sites that we did the windshield surveys of. We identified some areas that may be suitable for BMPs and kind of put it together with what could be done on a particular property. So this is an example from the Southbury Training School where we're just showing there's opportunities for some bioretention or pervious pavement or rain gardens or rain riparian buffer improvements. There's kind of a whole host of BMPs that are appropriate in the urban areas, but that's not why you guys are here tonight. You're here to hear about what's appropriate on agricultural landscape. So just kind of a la carte menu, things that can be suitable include contour farming, filter strips, riparian buffers, exclusionary fencing, manure management practices, vegetated swales, filter berms, bioretention, rainwater harvesting, subsurface infiltration, rotational pasturing of usage of cover crops. So Sarah's going to talk more about those, not all of them, but before we get there, I just want to mention, so in the watershed plan, we have a table that includes kind of all the sites we looked at, describes, are they a potential source of bacteria? What are potential best practices? Are there other recommendations that are suitable? Where do these fall on a priority list? What's their cost ratio? Are they relative cost, high, medium, low, and that sort of thing? And by including things in this watershed plan, it helps with funding eligibility down the road for other grants. And we're working on an updated existing conditions report that's going to bring in some more sites as an addendum to this list. And the other piece of the pollutant load or of the watershed plan was looking at, what is the pollutant load reduction that we could achieve if we were to implement all of the best practices within this plan. And this one's a little bit, this is kind of demonstrating the need for more information, but also it takes a village kind of concept in terms of implementing the BMPs. If we did everything in the watershed plan, we could achieve about an 11% load reduction for reducing fecal bacteria, E. coli. And 6% of that reduction is attributed to riparian buffer restoration. That was something that we saw come up repeatedly in our assessments, is just the quality of our riparian buffers. Green infrastructure, so areas that would retrofit impervious surfaces to permeable surfaces. If we did 10% of the existing impervious areas, we'd get about a 2% reduction in bacteria, and then a 1% reduction if we can eliminate any illicit discharges, if there are any. We'll have to detect if they're there. the total maximum daily load plan for our watersheds for the 3 impaired areas, the 4th being the Transylvania Brook, is still getting a TMDL, is looking at a 48 to 75% reduction. That was based on the limited data set. Based on the data that we have since collected, we're seeing that load reduction shift. We still have some areas that it's up to 75% reduction, but some sites only need like a 7%, I think was the number I calculated today. And then there's some that meet the water quality standards based on what we've observed in our monitoring. So we're working with the state on bringing all of that data together. And these are the sites that we monitor. So we'll be sharing that information in an updated existing conditions report, what the kind of new load reduction estimates are from our perspective, and also kind of bracketing where these BMPs may be more needed, but we'll take them anywhere. They'll be effective at the overall end of the stream, end of the sound, what's going into the sound. At the end of the day, it's going to help in some capacity to improve the waters of Connecticut. So that assessment work paired with some continued stream walk assessments, it just kind of echoes what we saw in our modeling in the general recommendations. The impaired buffer areas, we documented 19 areas this summer that could use improvements. Seeing the stormwater outfalls along the Wikipimi, it's there. That urban influence isn't as strong as the rural landscape, and actually the impaired buffers on the Wikipimi. It's a mix of what's suburban and more rural landscape, and where we see the livestock presence, but we also saw lots and lots of deer and wildlife. So it's varied up and down the channel in terms of what we're seeing where. So again, it takes a village, and it's the cumulative impact of all the BMPs and the various landscapes that will help restore our waters to a swimmable condition. And so thanks for bearing with me through all of that. I think I talked a little longer than I wanted to, so I'm going to just take a peek at the chat. Let's see, there's a few things from Anne. Okay. Oh, good, Elsa. So you can hear us. That's great. See a comment about the lands that you guys steward. So I don't see any questions so far. So I'm going to switch over to Sarah here, and I'll just do a stop share. Sarah, do you want me to share your slides, or do you want to use your PDF?
If you want to just share, I'll just let you know when I'm ready to move to the next one.
Okay, we'll go back to the share. How's everyone doing? Everyone good? See faces again. Get off my screen share, just looking at the slides. All right, yay, thumbs up. Good, people are still with us. Actually, see, we still have 10 participants. Good, no one left. All right, go back to the share here. All right, take it away, Sarah.
All right, thank you. So first, I'll just start by introducing myself. So I'm Sarah Ammirato. I'm a soil conservationist in the Torrington Field Office, and we cover all of Litchfield County, but there's an NRCS service center in every county in Connecticut. So I'm going to be covering NRCS technical and financial assistance that help farmers and landowners implement the best management practices that I'm going to go over. So like I mentioned before, NRCS is an agency within the USDA. We are non-regulatory, so all of our programs are voluntary. So producers come to us when they're ready to implement or need help implementing. So we work with producers, private landowners, farmers, and land trusts. I'll be referring to our clients, I guess, as producers. It's just a very general term that we use in NRCS to just kind of refer to everyone. So NRCS addresses what we call resource concerns. So some examples of that could be erosion, manure management, nutrient runoff, inefficient water use, plant productivity, inadequate resources for livestock, which includes food and water. And so once we identify the resource concern and we've completed an assessment, we can then discuss solutions and alternatives to implement change to improve it. You can go to the next slide. So one of our biggest programs is EQUIP, so Environmental Quality Incentives Program. So after the assessment and a conservation plan is written by NRCS, the producer may choose to enter into a contract. So what's really important about this is we are a cost share program, so it's not a grant. We don't really give out free money. We enter into contracts with our producers that have timelines. This includes like working with the producer and figuring out a timeline that's going to work for them. Because it's voluntary, we want to make sure that it's something that's actually achievable for them. We're not going to set goals that they're not going to be able to achieve. So participation in our programs is 100% voluntary, and we accept applications year round. However, we start processing our applications in October, the start of our fiscal year. And then we'll work with those applications through the winter, and we typically give out funds starting in March and April. So right now we are giving out funds for applications that we received last year. I know it's a little bit confusing with the federal fiscal year timeline, but that's how we work. So once the producer enters into a contract, NRCS is going to do a lot of work as far as like implementing, bringing on engineers, agronomists, archaeologists, all the necessary parties to make it the best project. So examples of the projects that we fund under EQUIP include forest management implementation. So that includes different types of cuts that you could do on your forest land, habitat improvement. We install fence and livestock watering systems, composting facilities, high tunnel and irrigation, root zone heating and other energy improvement practices, and finally, wildlife habitat. Next slide. So we offer a lot of other services other than just the cost share financial assistance. We also have technical assistance. So our NRCS field offices have expertise in all areas of production agriculture, forestry, and land management. And these services are all available at no cost to the producer. So if you have a question about anything that's going on with the way you're managing your land, you can call your local NRCS office and ask. This can either lead to, if it's a quick question, answer it on the phone, or it could lead to a site visit. We'll send a field representative like myself out to your farm or your property to give you more in-depth advice or answer your question that way. So technical assistance is a big part of what we do. We also have an easement program if you're interested in protecting your agricultural land. This is specific for agricultural land, so it needs to be a prime farmland or have historical features. We also do a lot of outreach events like this, so connecting producers to other resources and other farmers and creating a community. And finally, the current initiatives of NRCS. The first one is on-farm energy. So farms that are interested in improving their energy use will receive funds from USDA to complete an energy audit. And this will include recommendations for places where they could save energy, reduce energy or fuel use on their farm. Another initiative is through the organic program. So this prioritizes organic farms or farms that are transitioning to become organic. And our last current initiative right now is high tunnel systems. So this is relevant to weather resiliency and extending the growing season. And this includes all the supporting practices that go along with the high tunnel, including irrigation and cover cropping. So anything that could go along with the high tunnel is included in the initiative. So now I'm going to be going into the best management practices. The first one is kind of our most general, and it's where we like producers to start when they come to us, especially if they have livestock. So if you have livestock, you have manure, and improper manure storage and management can lead to a whole host of issues on your farm, including nutrient leaching, runoff into surface water, and increased bacterial loads in the watershed. So we put together a comprehensive nutrient management plan, or a CNMP. And this is a site-specific report to address the management on the farm, including stormwater management and land treatment and application. So if you have manure from your animals and you spread it on your fields, we include that all in the nutrient management plan. So this looks at soil type, current manure storage, animal numbers, and lots of other data. And it's required by NRCS before starting any other project that is going to address or include manure. So this is kind of our baseline, and our agronomists that work for NRCS put it together in a plan, and that also will give you recommendations for how you can better manage your manure. Like I said, it also looks at stormwater management, and once the baseline report is written, NRCS can make recommendations. All right. This is also going to be provided at no cost to the producer. If you're interested, you just give us a call and it's cost-free for us to write the plan. I also wanted to include a little bit, actually we can go to the next slide first and then I'll talk about that. So I have some before and after pictures of the best management practices. So this is actually the same site on the top photo as the bottom photo. So the first best management practice I'm going to get into today is waste storage facility. So this is a structure designed to hold liquid manure, agricultural waste, solid manure. We can design it to facilitate on-farm composting by doing a bin system, 3 to 5 bins. So you can turn your manure and move it and actually turn it into a product to export. Waste storage facilities, the main components are having a concrete pad, something that's impermeable, to prevent manure and excess nutrients getting into the groundwater. It has to have walls if you want to divide it into the bins for composting, and manure has to be covered. I know this photo was kind of a progress photo before they installed the roof over it, but we want our manure to be covered so it's protected. And it has to have a 100-foot setback from any stormwater surface drains. Our engineering team, if this is a practice you'd like to implement on your farm, is going to make sure of all of that when we have like site prep and meetings and everything. And I also wanted to include that currently the state of Connecticut Department of Agriculture is revising the CAFO permit, which is directly related to manure management and confined animal feeding operations. So they may be required to issue permits for farmers to comply with fluent limitations, permit conditions, discharges, treatment of wastewater, and implement best management practices. So if you feel that the changes that they're making right now may impact your farm, don't wait, reach out to NRCS and upgrade your manure management before it's required. It's also important to note that towns may also have stricter regulations or separate regulations as well as far as setbacks and storage. You can go to the next one, please.
I'll pepper into that. Connecticut doesn't have any regulations yet on limitations for spreading manure in winter months, although several New England states do, and it's probably not too far out from Connecticut looking to adopt some sort of standards on like a winter spreading ban window when things are frozen. So
yeah, and that's going to become definitely a current topic for farmers to start thinking about, because if you're not allowed to spread during the winter, you need to make sure you have enough storage so you can safely store your manure through those months. Okay, so the next practice I'm going to go into is a sacrifice area, or a heavy use area is what we call it. So this is an area that's subject to constant traffic from livestock. A lot of the times it'll be around your heavily used areas, whether in the pasture, around a watering system, around a gate, along fence lines. And the goal is to keep manure from leaching into the groundwater or causing soil compaction from the constant use of animals walking back and forth. So you can use a lot of different materials for this: stone, gravel, sand, or concrete. In this picture, this is right where the water is. It's a heavily used area for the horses coming in and out of the stalls. So instead of having soil or dirt that could turn to mud and become compacted and make a mess, this is what we call a sacrifice area. Recently, I've been out to a couple of horse farms, and I've seen some really great use of their arenas for horse turnout when the pastures are wet. So a horse arena is typically a stone, gravel, or a sand mix. It's fenced in, and if you have your horses, and especially in the winter months in this early spring when the pastures are really muddy, using your arenas as a sacrifice area to turn your horses out could be a really great option. Next slide, please. So our next practice is fencing. So once again, the same sort of before and after photo. So we don't like livestock in water. That is a direct source of contamination. So livestock fencing can be really beneficial in eliminating a point source of water pollution. So keeping your animals and their manure out of the surface water is going to improve water quality. So you could do either exclusion fence to keep them out of the surface water, or another practice I'll talk about later is rotational grazing. So you can have temporary fence that you can move and change as you need. NRCS, again, will provide engineering plans and specifications for the type of fencing depending on what kind of livestock you have. And that is really flexible with woven wire, barbed wire, electrified. The goal is to just keep them out of water bodies. Next, please. Okay, so next is rotational grazing. This is, again, is related directly to the fencing practice. So this is where you're going to want to use the temporary fence. As you can see in the bottom picture, that blue fence line is just plastic and it's electrified. The wires are electrified, so you can move it, make it smaller, larger. If you want your animals to stay out of a wet area of the field, you can fence them out of it easily that way. Part of this best management practice is having a grazing management plan that looks at how many livestock numbers you have and all your pasturing options on the farm. So if there is a field that you know gets super wet at a certain time of year, the grazing plan will address that and suggest that you keep them on a drier field or a field that doesn't get as saturated. Practices that also go along with this, apart from the fencing, is livestock waterers, pasture reseeding, and a heavy use area to protect the areas of the watering. So benefits of this is you're limiting the number of concentration areas you have, which in turn reduces erosion and compaction, and it overall improves the pasture health and reduces the opportunity for invasive species to come in. Next. So this is one of my favorite practices that we offer. It's contour farming. In this practice, again, before and after photo, addresses runoff, soil erosion, and contamination of surface water. So we typically will implement this practice on a field that we deem as highly erodible or has easily erodible soils or has a steep slope to it. So this is the best farming practice if you're farming corn and hay. So you're going to plant in strips. And so one strip in this lower photo is corn, and then one strip is hay. So this practice reduces erosion, and NRCS can assist with the adaptation of this practice by evaluating topo maps of the field and taking into consideration the size of the equipment and farming implements of that specific farm. A field visit will be conducted, and we will come out and actually flag the areas that should be planted corn and should be planted into hay. This practice is very flexible, and it depends on the field and the land as to how wide the strip should be. But generally, the goal of it is that the grass strips will slow down and absorb excess water before it reaches the water body. We also recommend that a grass row should be planted if your field borders any water bodies, regardless of what you're planting. Again, just to slow the runoff and direct runoff from the fields. In this top row, you can also see that the corn is planted up and down the slope, which actually allows water to form channels and increases erosion. Whereas in contour farming, you plant left to right of the slope. So it slows down and it doesn't create just a direct channel for water to flow down. Next slide. This is another one of my favorites, is cover cropping. And I like it because it's incredibly flexible. There's so many different options as far as implementing this onto every kind of farm. So it could be implemented into a single species. If you just have a cornfield, you can implement this. Or if you have a vegetable farm where you grow a lot of different things, there's also applications for cover crops there as well. So a cover crop is planted as a seasonal vegetative cover. Traditionally, it's planted in the late fall. It's allowed to cover the soil through the winter, and then you would terminate it in the spring when you get ready to plant your cash crop. So there are endless benefits to using cover crops. The main ones are to prevent erosion, keep the soil in place, increase organic matter, suppress weeds because you'll have something growing in the soil. It won't be bare for the weeds to come in right as the spring starts. It actually improves the water holding capacity of the soil and reduces compaction. In certain applications, it can add available nutrients for your cash crop. For example, the bottom photo is a pea and oat mix. Peas are a legume which fixes nitrogen in the soil, which is the primary nutrient required by corn to grow. So a lot of times a pea and oat mix will be followed by corn, and you're actually increasing the amount of available nutrients in the soil. So there's a lot of options for implementation as far as what you can mix. You can do a single species. The top photo is winter rye. It's seeded at really high rates. It establishes quickly. It can be planted very, very late in the fall and still establish before a frost. Winter rye is a great place to start if you have no experience with cover crops. The other sort of area for flexibility is in termination. So when the spring comes and you're getting ready to plant your cash crop, you can use a herbicide if that's something you're comfortable with on your farm. But there's also mechanical controls such as roller crimping, which is an implement that pretty much just crushes the cover crop down and kills it and then allows you to plant right into it. You could mow it, you could graze it, or you could plant it green. There are certain mixes that will winter kill. So when the springtime comes around, you don't have to worry about termination. There's a lot of flexibility, like I mentioned before, in cover crops. And NRCS will help producers and recommend a mix and a management plan based on what's available at each individual farm. Next slide. So this one is directly related to water quality. It's a stream buffer. So it's the establishment of structures and vegetation to prevent erosion of the stream banks and reduce the amount of nutrients entering the surface water. So by planting a buffer of native plants, both shrubs, grasses, all different kinds to trap sediment and nutrients before they enter the surface water. Stream buffers have also been seen to decrease stream temperature, which improves the water quality. To be effective, NRCS recommends a 20 to 35 foot wide buffer of all streams paired with permanent fencing if you have livestock on your farm. So you're keeping them out of the buffer, especially if you have goats or something that would enjoy eating all of these nice green things. And they should be established of native plant species that are well adapted. Next slide. Okay, that was the last one. So if you have any questions or you'd like more information about specific NRCS programs, this is my email. And I included the Litchfield County Field Office phone number as well as New Haven Fairfield County, because I know a few of the towns within the watershed fall into New Haven and Fairfield County. Yeah, so I'll be on. If you guys have any questions, you can leave them in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. So I haven't seen any questions pop up here yet. Anne shared the link to NRCS's website again, so that should be in the chat and available. I want to just kind of expand on a couple other BMPs that Sarah didn't touch on, and there may or may not be things available for funding through EQIP or other mechanisms with NRCS, and there's other ways to fund things, not just through NRCS. So NRCS is going to have tech specs that they adhere to and want to see as part of part of that contract for implementation. But this particular one I know was not done through that. This was done through some private loans. But rainwater harvesting is another great opportunity to reduce runoff, stuff coming off the landscape, and capture it for later use. So this is up at Earth Tone's Native Plant Nursery, and that photo on the left, there's a greenhouse, which is brand new, and a barn. The barn already has a cistern system that is capturing tens of thousands of gallons of water in rain events. And there's a pump station so they can irrigate within the nursery when it's dry. Their photos on the right here are the brand new cistern that they've just installed, and that is underneath the greenhouse. So great opportunity to help manage the timing of storm events. You know, when there's an abundance, store it up, reduce the runoff, and then use it later when there's a shortage. Another BMP that is something we saw this summer that could be appropriate is, we know sometimes we need to get from one side of the stream to the other, and so there may be either livestock crossings, there may be vehicle crossings. It's just easier to go over or through than around. There's some great, other strategies for crossings. They can be permanent, they can be temporary. It could be a timber harvesting style bridge in the top right or top left. Could be a culvert with passage over it, or it could be a more stable structure that goes fjord style through the stream, but prevents that compaction, but still allows for fish passage. So there's just some other opportunities to make sure we're not causing compaction of the stream bank and sedimentation, and continually disturbing habitat areas. So this kind of addresses that with the stable crossing bottom. And this could be paired with other strategies. You can see that there's livestock fencing in a couple of these photos as well to keep things out of the river, keep our cattle or horses or whatever may be crossing. And when it comes to irrigation, just keep in mind that there are state permits that are required if you're withdrawing more than 50,000 gallons a day. Most folks for farming in our area usually are not doing that, but just be aware that if you're drawing over a certain volume, it can trigger permits. And when it comes to fueling generators, making sure there's some kind of spill prevention barrier is a good best practice to adhere to. And try to avoid creating any stone dams to back up water, because that is a wetlands violation right there. So these are ones that we observed, but that were not associated with any irrigation, just things we saw out through the woods. But just keep in mind of what could be a violation. And to Sarah's point about the technical assistance, NRCS provides technical assistance. We can also come out and take a look and see, what kinds of things might you be interested in, what kind of constraints might exist on your property in terms of, sizing limitations, space limitations, trying to figure out what cost limitations may exist or cost barriers, looking at site-specific BMPs. So it could be manure management, it could be livestock fencing, it could be trying to stabilize a stream bank, for example, where there could be a failure, past failure, where something just is continuing to erode that needs some stabilization. Looking at those best management practices for the kind of sacrifice areas. There may be opportunities in those sacrifice areas to pair that with some sort of bioretention or rainwater harvesting type system. You might have water coming off the roof of the barn and you want to prevent that runoff from going across the surface of the sacrifice area. That's where it's not really going to soak in too well. So it really is kind of like, let's take a look at the big picture. What are the steps for implementation? What's possible? And that's something that Sarah can do, certainly. And that's something that we can also tag along in and help have those conversations, or take a look at if you want to look at other avenues that are not NRCS. And PRWC can also be a creative partner from a funding mechanism. We may be able to help look for grant sources that are actual grants versus a cost share kind of program, and help develop a proposal and help be a kind of a co-sponsor of sorts, a pass through for implementing on the ground stewardship practices. And I just want to call attention to that there is some money. It is actually through NRCS. There is some cost share. There's a matching component to this, but there's $40,000 basically earmarked for riparian buffer enhancements along the Wikipimi River. Some of that money may also be able to be available for livestock fencing. And our goal is to enhance the buffer width along 2,000 feet of the Wikipimi River. So if that's something folks might be interested in pursuing, definitely reach out to us, and we'll be reaching out to some farms in particular, as well as potentially some residential landowners that may not be farm operations to help spread the plants along the river. And with that, I think we're right down to the end. But before I go there, I'm going to stop share. Let's see. Where is that button? There's that button. I want to go to a poll here. Go to the question about, before we leave, what types of water sources are coming through your properties? Make sure you guys are all still with us.
Was only allowed to choose one.
Oh, darn it. I didn't
That's
change
okay.
that one. That's
I had
okay.
the same problem. Yeah, we have them all.
So
Groundwater.
everybody picks groundwater. I guess I failed that question, creating that poll. What are you gonna do? All right, so that doesn't really tell us what we want to know then. That's okay. How about, have your operations been impacted by any of the following? This one I did make multiple choice. Last call. And
Lisa's studying.
all right, so we've definitely had flooding and drought and some wind issues in our area. That is, we've all experienced that.
Right.
Imagine a few of our producers have probably been impacted by hail and snow and ice as well when it comes to like orchard crops and things like that. And then last question is, do folks have any particular BMPs that they'd like to learn more about, from like more in depth in terms of the benefits, or kind of what are those, what's the criteria, what are the how-tos? There's some that we didn't touch on, for example, like we talked about contour farming and that sort of thing, but we didn't touch on low or no-till farming practices, and we didn't talk about integrated pest management tonight. And that's now as we just start to talk with our farming community a little bit more, wanted to know how we can better serve you guys. We may be able to bring other speakers in to talk about specific BMPs, or you know, go more in depth to figure out what can work. It's going to support the bottom line. Give this one a couple more seconds to do that. Good mix. And that one, I'll share the results with you guys. So some interest in the stream crossings, more on buffers and low no-till farming. Rainwater harvesting is a popular one. Kyle and Lisa, we'll have to have you guys do a talk on that at some point. You're on the hook. And IPM and cover crops. So that's good to know. That's good to know what we can, you know, dive into a little bit more. And let's see. Does anyone have any questions, thoughts, ideas they want to share in terms of ag practices, and you know what kinds of things might be of interest for? I don't know. I don't have questions.
Make a link for the presentation available on the website.
Yes, it will
I would
be.
think so, but yeah.
Yeah. So we're recording we're gonna post the video and we'll post the slides. So if people don't want to listen to the video and just toggle through slides, they can. And we'll be, kind of doing a little more circuit rider type of outreach to some operations along the Wikipimi watershed areas, looking for anyone that might be interested to team up on planting some areas. And yeah, so and then we'll start our sampling again for the season in 2 weeks from tomorrow. We've got 4 more rounds of sampling to do that will really feed into that updated existing conditions report that'll get posted to the website once it's finalized. And it'll include some more, hopefully, if we find some operators that are willing to work with us, some more site-specific implementation strategies. So kind of piece it all together, what could work on that site. I don't think I had one in this particular version of the presentation, but I could put one in. I was trying to keep it a little more kind of anonymous in terms of what's where, but we can take an aerial image like this and put, like just from the aerial, like, yeah, you might need a little bit more buffer over here. And if we zoom in, we might see a couple areas where that stream crossing may be appropriate. It looks like there's some compaction, looks like there's some wet areas. We can kind of piece it all together in terms of what an implementation strategy might look like, and then and add to the watershed plan where things may have been absent from the first pass. So, and then we'll move forward with trying to implement some of these things on the ground. Okay.
This was helpful to me, Carol. I'm a neophyte here, so I'm hearing it all for the first time, and I thought it was extremely helpful.
Good. Good.
How to think like a farmer.
Yeah. And yeah, really at the end of the day, like, all these practices are important, but from what we saw with the modeling work that we did in this watershed, and it's really it's the stream buffers. We have a number of sites that we're starting to implement some practices with, more municipally owned. So it's not just residential, it's not just agricultural, it really is across the board. So, but that can go a long way to filtering, stabilizing banks, filtering nutrients, filtering bacteria load, and just slowing the flow, and big picture, improve quality of the stream habitat, provide shading, keep those stream temperatures low, and what else? Wildlife corridors, it's all the things that those stream buffers can do. And there's one more that I wanted to call out, but there's so many benefits of buffers that, yeah, food source for wildlife protection, all that good stuff. So it's yeah, that's kind of our biggest starting point. And then there's a lot of other infrastructure, BMPs that we can look at integrating. So with that, I think, unless there's any other questions or thoughts, anything good for the good of the order, I think I see Lisa's well-stocked dry bar back there in the background. That we'll say cheers to Happy World Water Day and National Ag Day, and keeping our rivers swimmable and fishable, and keeping our water drinkable.
Let's go PRWC.
Yeah,
All right.
Thanks, Carol.
You're welcome. Thanks for
Thank you,
being
Sarah.
the choir to preach to tonight, but help
All
spread the
right.
gospel. Spread the gospel.
Yep, that's it.
What I need to be equipped for, and I like it.
Yeah. All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Sarah.
everyone.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night.
All right. Have a good night, all.